Namaskar, everybody, and hello. I'm going to tell you a story today. A story of a man, an Indian man, who was a lawyer and who came from Africa. Any guesses? Well, no. I saw that coin drop expression on everybody's face, but I'm not talking about Mahatma Gandhi. But we've heard so many stories and seen so many movies on him that these facts have got embedded in our mind. I'm going to talk about another man, an Indian man, a lawyer, who came from Africa to practice law in India. He was blessed with a baby boy. And he decided, I don't want this child of mine to go through that stress-filled education that I went through in my childhood. I don't want my boy to sit in a classroom shackled with textbooks and writing and whatnot. So he researched traditional Indian practices, global practices, and he wrote a book, Swapna. Swapna means daydreaming. And the hero of this book was a teacher. And this teacher, armed with these lovely ideas, went into a classroom, fifth grade classroom, and said, I'm going to teach in an innovative manner. So he entered this classroom, a classroom filled with boys, mischievous, whistling, hooting, shouting boys with dirty faces, shirts torn. And he went there and he said, I'm going to try something new today. And he said, I'm going to try meditation with boys. And he tried it. And what happened? The boys continued to holler and whistle and throw things, paper planes. They refused to listen. And this teacher of ours was dejected. He almost thought of giving up teaching. He went home and an idea struck him. He went to school the next day and he didn't start meditating. He started telling a story. He started telling a story, and one boy, two boys, three boys slowly started coming and sitting down next to him, listening to his story. Slowly, as his story built up characters, emotions, all the boys stopped doing what they were doing and they sat down to listen to the story. And then he stopped. No, not because the story ended. He stopped and he told the boys, I will tell you the end tomorrow, but on one condition. You'll have to have a bath and you will have to take care of your uniform. And what do you think he saw the next day? He went to class and he was hearing no sound and he thought maybe the boys had skipped school. But as he entered the classroom, he saw them all sitting down, waiting for him to start the end of his story. All of them with faces scrubbed clean, uniforms spick and span, and they were all there raptly listening to his story. How did he start his story that day? He started from the beginning once again. And the boy said, but you've told us this. Tell us the end. So he said, no. I'm going to tell you the story once more, and this time I'm going to make some mistakes. I want you to see if you know where I'm making those mistakes, and then I'll tell you the end of the story. And this is how this man, this teacher from Swapna, taught children for the whole year, and boys who were failing excelled in their exams. And he taught every subject with stories. Why do you think the boys changed? They changed because their brains lit up when he told them the story. Look at the slide on the top. Why did their brains light up? We all have a very important part of our brain which is called the prefrontal cortex, The thinking brain, the executive brain. It's the only part of the brain that differentiates us from the monkeys. So next time you hear the term they are behaving like monkeys, it means they are not using their thinking brain. And what did he do? Look at that slide. He developed, through stories, focus and self-control. They had to control themselves. They had to sit for the story. They had to focus to understand the story and find out what were the mistakes. He also inculcated perspective taking, because when you listen to a story, there are so many characters in the story, and you start listening and aligning to each one's perspective. You start having communication. Of course, language is there in a story. You start having cognitive flexibility. And that is the most important thing that helped us during the pandemic. Cognitive flexibility. I know I have to do something, but I can't because of the situation. That's called cognitive flexibility. You know, we play that game Simon Says. I like to make it Shivaji Says, but because we said Simon, go back, so we can't have that. But when you play that game, that's cognitive flexibility. You can't do what the person is telling you till the person doesn't say Simon Says or Shivaji Says. That's cognitive flexibility. And that happens in a story. Estimation of time. Do I have time to finish the story? What is the time in which the characters were in a story? And deferring gratification. Deferring gratification is what we all do when we sit in a program like this. We may want to go to the washroom, but you can't. You have to defer that gratification. You may want to eat something, but you can't. And that's what those children did. And these all are part of your prefrontal cortex. This is what makes us human. And the stories light up your prefrontal cortex. And that's what he did. Do you like to see movies? Do you like to see OTT series? Do you love reading novels? Do you like listening to gossip? We all do. Why? Why do we like movies and novels and OTT series and gossip? Because they all have stories. And stories release oxytocin. It's a hormone which is also called the cuddle hormone or the love hormone or the moral hormone. But it's released when we listen to a story. And that's what these ad companies, these movie makers, these publishers know the secret too. They know how they can capture our brains by releasing serotonin. But then, why don't we tell stories lifelong to our students? Why do stories stop after the pre-primary? Why don't we tell stories to our primary children, our secondary children, our senior secondary children, just like the teacher in our story did? Why do we stop telling stories? Why do we suddenly say it's chemistry now, it's geography now? Everything has a story. Chemicals have a story. The world has a story. Everything has a story. Why don't we reduce the stress in this world that children face? Because if we only tell stories, look at what would happen to our brains. Can we go to the brain slide? Look at what would happen to our brains. It lights up. Every part of the brain lights up. And that's why you have attention, you have focus, you have everything. Have you heard of Panchatantra? Let me show you the name on my next slide. It's Panchatantra. Do you know what this was? You all must have read stories from the Panchatantra. The Panchatantra was written in the 4th or the 6th century. And Vishnu Sarma, who wrote this book, was a scholar. He was an educator. And he was invited by a king to teach his 3 naughty boys all about running a kingdom, principles, morals, values. And when Vishnu Sarma met these 3 boys, these uncouth princes who just wouldn't listen to anybody, or listen to reason, or focus, he decided to tell them stories. And the stories he told to educate them is called the Panchatantra. And that, my friends, is the power of stories. Cause and effect. That's what makes our brain light up whenever there is cause and effect. Let me show you the next slide. I did a little research when I had to do this TED Talk, that what does a good TED Talk have? And I saw these points. It said you have to have good voice modulation, your volume, your pitch, your tone. You have to have gestures. You have to move around. You have to tell a story. You have to ask questions. You have to pause. And I realized we do all this when we tell a story. And why do TED Talks work so well around the world? Because each one of us who come on the stage is telling a story. And stories do something more important to the brain. They do something called RAD learning. RAD learning. Let me show you RAD learning. RAD is R stands for reticular activating system, A stands for amygdala, and D stands for dopamine. The reticular activating system, very simply put, is at the base of your spine, and it helps you be alert, have conscious thought, and focus. A is your amygdala, is the emotion center of your brain. It gets put off very easily, especially when there's stress. So if you bring stress, students will not focus, students will not want to do that particular subject. Just like sometimes maths brings stress. Why does it do so? Because the way it's taught brings that stress, and your amygdala shuts down your brain. And then there's dopamine. You know the short form of dopamine? It's called dope. And that's what most youngsters these days are seeking, dope. Why? Because they're not getting it from their everyday life. It's actually a brain chemical that's secreted on its own. But when your amygdala is not happy or your reticular activating system is not there, your dopamine will not be secreted. And stories help you do RAD learning. They activate your reticular activating system, they keep your amygdala calm, and they ensure that dopamine is released in your brain. So when you have RAD learning, why do teachers not understand this concept? When ad companies understand it, when movie makers understand it, we get hooked onto advertisements, but reel makers have understood it. And they ensure that RAD learning takes place every time you watch a reel. And what we want today is that all of us need to understand that the power of stories is the power of the brain. So I'm going to leave you with a question. How is your RAD index right now? And you can thank me later for your full brain workout. Thank you. Thank you.